I'm joined today by writer and game designer Arinn Dembo. Arinn, welcome to the show.
Hi. Hello.
Arinn and I discovered each other through the wonderful world of Lovecraftiana. I believe it was around the time you were working on She Walks in Shadows, I want to say, when that was starting to come out. And just
hmm
we managed to swirl around in that general maelstrom of weirdness that is the weird fiction world. But much to my excitement, Arinn has a storied history working in games, working in with companies like Sierra, and currently she's working with Kerberos Productions. If you're aware at all of the Sword of the Stars franchise, Arinn is one of the, if not the main, sort of story writers, world developer, galaxy developers, I guess that's considered at that point. Tell us
Universe,
about
basically.
the whole universe. Uh, di-
Yep, it's a universe.
Demiurge, is that a useful
Yeah.
title? Uh,
I think my title on the forums is literally lore goddess. So
okay,
yeah,
there we go.
it's
There we go. So tell us about Sword of the Stars and how you got involved with Kerberos.
Kerberos is a team that originally emerged in 2004 from a studio called Barking Dog Studios in Vancouver. The core team from Barking Dog Studios that split off to form Kerberos had previously worked on two games that I was peripherally involved with: Homeworld Cataclysm and a cute game for Disney called Treasure Planet, which has a small but extremely fond following even to this day. After making Homeworld Cataclysm and Treasure Planet, the the Treasure Planet team was put onto a game called Bully, which some people might find familiar when when the company was bought by Rockstar and became Rockstar Vancouver. And rather than continue working on Bully, the Sword of the Stars team, the Kerberos team, split off and formed their own company and started working on a 4X space strategy game called Sword of the Stars. And I was there from day one as the lead writer of Sword of the Stars and remain the lead writer of the Sword of the Stars franchise to this day, although I am also a free agent and work on other games. So,
And what was how did Sword of the Stars sort of set itself apart from the other big 4X games like Masters of Orion, Star Control, that kind of those sort of big elephants in the room?
um, those were all games that we played and enjoyed. Sword of the Stars introduced some new innovations, which other games of its type have imitated occasionally since that time. One of the big ones was the randomized tech tree. So each game, as you choose a faction, you will have a randomized tech tree, which means that not all techs will be available to you. Not all branches of the text tree will be available to you. There are user hacks that mods that will open up all parts of the tech tree at all times, but they sort of reduce the variability of the game by doing that. It also has pretty deep and extensive lore. I know because I wrote it and I've been working on it for consistently for like 15 years now, so it's a lot. Uh, we published a book in a premium lore book in 2013, which was literally 444 pages long
Yowzers!
of art and text and interviews with the team and stuff like that. So we've done a lot of work on that franchise over the years. Um, and we're still working on the franchise. We have a new game out, which is called The Pit Infinity, and that is the sort of the latest Sword of the Stars game. It is a 3D first-person shooter style roguelike game, so it has some depth. It's slowed down gameplay from your basic first-person shooters, shoot 'em up. You have to conserve ammunition, collect things, make things, stuff like that. It also introduces cooperative play, which we did not have on previous iterations of that game. So it kind of exciting, and it just very recently came out of early access, and it's starting to get lots of attention. So I'm excited to see that it's doing well.
And when you're working on lore, is there a sort of separate discipline for say story writing, right? When you're doing kind of big games or role playing games where you have to figure out the branches and like, okay, when are they going to get to this part of the story? With lore, it seems you're really just creating the giant backlog that they're going to be coming at. Is that accurate, or are there sort of interesting tricks and quirks you've discovered along the way?
Um, it's not as unrelated as one might think. All writing for games, or at least the vast majority of it, is one of two things. It is either copywriting for the marketing department, or it is to some degree narrative design. Um, Narrative design is the discipline that covers all of the things that you're talking about. Like, it's the collective term for branching dialogue, branching paths, And the core discipline of narrative design starts with the Choose Your Own Adventure books, the first interactive fiction that some people might remember from like the 80s, where you pick up a book and then you turn to page 76 and then you find out what happens on page 76 and then you make a choice, and if you choose this you go to page 102, and if not you go back to page 38 or whatever.
The original hack mods for
There's
that were
there's
sticking your thumb in the book so that you could go
yeah.
back. So
Yes, exactly.
I downloaded that
Use your
DLC. I
Post-it
paid
note.
extra.
Yeah. You have the extra DLC, which was called Post-it notes. So you can flip back to your previous choice. That was just your save game, basically. So I made a poor choice, and this game is now over, and I do not like this outcome, so I'm going to go back. But yeah, if you there's actually a website that collects all of the narrative branching path trees that are correspond to the original Choose Your Own Adventure books. And those branching trees are quite fascinating to look at. And those are sort of very early primitive proto-narrative designs. Narrative design can become much more complex in the modern age. And a lot of the narrative design I have done has been non-standard. So I do narrative design for games that are open world and sandbox oriented. And that is a very different challenge than being able to put somebody on rails and have them do exactly what I say, or, follow a path that I preset, which is almost as easy as writing a novel, where the reader has no choices and they can only turn the page or not. So
Unless you start getting into some weird House of Leaves business, but
yeah, no, I guess that. The choice to continue to engage with the story is pretty much all you get in traditional publishing, but it gets way weirder in narrative design.
and with this, you essentially, you're not dealing with the original IP. It's not like you can just go back and watch old Star Trek episodes or flip through countless expanded universe Star Wars novels. Like what was your remit? Were you sort of given, all right, give us 4 aliens by Tuesday, or how did that sort of process start off?
My lead designer on the project was my previous writing partner, Martin Surlis. He took over all the narrative design, or not the narrative design, but the mechanical design of the game. And his first instructions were, I want you to make me 4 space opera races, and they have to be X, Y, and Z. So in this particular case, it was, I want a reptile race, I want an aquatic race, I want an insect race, but they can't be cliched. was his instruction. I'm not sure I understand. Which was like, that's like, I would like you to pour me a glass of water, but I don't want it to be wet. Like, it's like literally that layer of impossibility. But I did my best. And so I invented the future version of humanity and then 3 alien races to start off with. And from there, it was really just about how to expand the universe and how we were going to continue to evolve it.
Did you have a background in space opera or sort of sci-fi fandom to draw upon, or did you have to kind of go out and start, reading up and boning up on, your foundations and all sorts of other business?
Oh no! I had a deep well. Of very, very silly science fiction to draw on, going back many years. I think I was dragged into the theater to see the first Star Wars when I was like 7. And, I rushed home every day after school to watch the original series Star Trek as well. And, read various, they did a full reprint run of John Carter of Mars and various other extremely silly space opera stuff in the 80s. And so I read all of those things avidly. Since then I have found that space opera can be considerably less silly as well, but I had plenty of, that core stuff. And I was also familiar with Master of Orion and Spaceward Ho and VGA Planets, a lot of other previous 4X games that touched on sort of similar material, so I knew what had already been done. And we started making decisions that were specifically about staking out new ground and making things a little more solid state and a little less generic, to taking a more in-depth approach to the lore of a game.
And how sort of bound to the lore have you managed to maintain? Like, are you still sort of, are you still looking at, stuff you wrote 10, 15 years ago and being like, yep, okay, well, I got to abide by that? Or you're like, a wormhole got rid of that planet, so we don't have to care about them anymore. Or the time stream flummoxed.
Well, because I was always designing for an open world game with a great deal of randomization, the design that I could do was the narrative design that I could do was much more meta. And for that reason, it is a lot easier for me to create something that is not, that does not become a canonical nightmare. So in terms of like, for example, Sword of the Stars as a franchise does have a number of storylines, but they play out at a very large scale. So we released the first game, and the first game, the original Sword of the Stars, which came out in 2006, sort of represents a certain time frame, like a period of 100 years, when you have first contact between, these first early empires that are forming in this region of space, and they're running into some of the very old nightmare tech from previous civilizations and conflicting with one another, and you have some additional scenarios to run through and stuff like that. As we updated the game over time, we released periodic updates, which, would include all sorts of stuff, like little tweaks and fixes to mechanics, or, a bug that we might have found, or things like that. But it also included lore updates. And this would be, my opportunity to introduce some new information. Add a new menace, or add a hint about what was going to come out, what emergent empire was going to appear in the next DLC that was available, and things like that. And so I played a very, very long game with Sword of the Stars. Like when I was actively working on the first game, that period of time was from 2004 to like 2011. And there were secrets that were going to be revealed in 2011 that we had like 5 years of the fans playing the game, and only one or two of them actually guessed what I had up my sleeve, and I was very pleased about that.
We have a question from one of our audience members, Crash, who wants to know what you think about the trend towards what they're calling dynamic-ish story generation in games like Stellaris or Crusader Kings, where they're combining circumstances with random events.
I can't really speak to that. I don't really want to comment too much on Paradox titles.
Oh, fair enough.
Particularly ones that are imitative of my own work, which is how I feel about Stellaris. I've heard.
But I guess that idea of there
Kings,
being
so.
kind of a narrative that starts to either, even if it's not consciously written down, begin to suggest itself to players. I mean, I remember playing games like Medieval Total War, and like stories were being suggested by what was happening and playing out, and marriages and alliances. And it is, like I said, it's sort of happening procedurally and dynamically without there being kind of a sort of, all right, this is going to happen, and then this,
Yeah, that's a skillful use of a certain type of open world narrative design, and amongst other creators, the team at Kerberos helped to pioneer that approach. We are from early days one of the best practitioners of that art form, because we had two paradoxical ambitions which were hard to achieve at the same time. One, that we wanted people to have a deeply involved emotional experience where there was a story to the game that they were playing, and they felt very much that they were a part of things and that their choices mattered. But also we wanted infinite replayability, and that is extremely hard to do unless you take a, take this very particular approach to narrative design. So all of the elements of the story world are in the sandbox. You may encounter them or not. You may choose to embrace them or not. And so every game that you play is kind of an emergent story in its own way. All of the elements of the universe are there. You can become familiar with them over time, but how things play out, how the story plays out is different every time.
Another question we have is about what you've seen that's interesting, mostly sort of structurally innovative coming out of the interactive fiction community online.
I was surprised to see how much depth there is in the available interactive fiction. It really does seem to be a really vibrant art form. And there are some pretty exciting companies who are developing, like, their publishing arms. Some friends of mine have been working with a company called Choice of Games, which has developed a very lively market for interactive fiction and a lot of diversity in their authorship and readership. So, definitely recommend Evan Peterson's Dragstar for those who have not played it, especially if you love Drag Race, the show. You get your chance to win that show, which I found delightful. And I have considered writing a game for Choice of Games. I'm sort of still in the pitch process with them. We'll see where that goes.
Excellent. And so right now, you said the Pit is kind of the current big project of Sword of the Stars, and it's already out of early access.
Yeah, that is the most recent release from Kerberos. I have had a sort of an open year of working on various freelance projects. I started 2019 working on a medical AI for a company called Blue Mesa Health, and I worked on a couple of other games this year and wrote a season of a TV show for children, and etc. So it's been a very busy year for me. But yeah, the Pit Infinity has been an ongoing project, and the team was comfortable taking it out of early access. And I'm assuming that if it follows the same developmental course as the original Pit did, that you can potentially see a lot of expansion and development in that game. The base platform is there and it's very fun, but yeah, there's a lot of potential to develop that platform a lot more. So
That's exciting.
look for good things. Yeah, look for good things in the future.
I do want to jump back. I do like the future, but I would like to jump back into the past and just indulge myself and ask about your work on Arcanum. So, for
Okay.
the folks in the audience, you'll also have to indulge me. Arcanum I think it was isometric, but it was definitely sort of like third person role playing kind of party development game, a bit like Baldur's Gate or Fallout, but it was in this really, really well crafted steampunk magic world. Every sort of character had to choose between them, sort of the amount of magic or tech they wanted to use, and the more sort of like technically able they were, it meant they could be less magical, and sort of vice versa. It was incredibly fun and just a beautiful game with a lot of rich art. I was telling Aaron before the show, like I still have my like CD-ROM floating around here somewhere of
Well,
it.
it's very old school.
So tell us about how you got involved with Arcanum and working on that, and what your experience was with it.
Okay, I got involved with Arcanum through its publisher. Um, when you have a publisher who is working with a developer that's very busy and they may or may not have certain resources available to them or enough time to handle everything themselves, the publisher will occasionally hire, a mercenary, which is what I was at the time, a freelancer, to handle some small part of what needs to be done, or sometimes larger parts of what needs to be done if what needs to be done is a lot of writing. At that point, I was a freelance writer who was called in for a few different games from Sierra Online, and Arcanum happened to be one of them. And what Arcanum needed was a manual with a bunch of sort of Victoriana type background fiction. Somebody who was sort of familiar with, the historical sources for Victorian writing, and particularly Victorian science and, Victorian travelogues and stuff like that. And they wanted it to have a flavor that sort of corresponded to the gentleman adventurers of the day. So I created a steampunk version of Charles Darwin and a steampunk version of Richard Francis Burton, and I wrote extended sections of the manual for them that were from those points of view. So I made, my exciting version of steampunk version of Charles Darwin was a person, he was a scientist who was married to an elf woman who was trying to ascertain the origin of all of the various hominid looking species in this world. Like, this is a world with gnomes and elves and halflings and trolls and giants and stuff like that. And so here's this hapless dude trying to figure out where they all come from, and how they emerge from the archaeological record or the paleontological record. And of course, my version of Darwin is much more willing to court controversy than the real version of Darwin, who avoided publishing his book because he was afraid people would start screaming at him about evolution very early on. And then I created this Richard Francis Burton type character who was probably less exciting than the real Burton. If only because he had to be sort of PG-13, and the real Burton had no such restrictions. Who was traveling around and then writing little travelogue descriptions of all of these locations. And yeah, that was a very fun project. I also wrote some marketing copy for them, like, newspapers from, the alternative version of London for them, and, transcripts from debates between the people representing science and the people representing magic that were sort of, I was trying to capture that tone of Victorian peck sniffery that you always have when you have two great intellects that come together to, debate which of us is a fool.
Dear sir, my esteemed colleague.
My esteemed colleague is a complete idiot, and he also is guilty of setting my beard on fire. It was sort of that sort of a slightly dry humor, but it seemed to work. And yeah, it was one of many assignments that I had for Sierra at the time.
Now, beyond just writing video games, you also just write. And when you do write, do you like to escape from sort of the same genres you're delving in sort of professionally with games, or do you just, nope, I'm going to talk about different aliens over here now?
Yeah, I sometimes actually, I write. I've been known to write some fiction that's set in the Sword of Stars universe for people who enjoy that sort of thing. I have a military science fiction novel that people can read. I write for my own entertainment. I write sci-fi that's can be space opera-y, and I sometimes also write some fantasy and quite a bit of horror. I think, like, for my personal work, I'm probably best known for the horror that I do, which is sort of got a mythos, Lovecraftian cosmic horror vibe. And I enjoy contributing to cosmic horror type projects. So I've been published in Weird Tales and H.P. Lovecraft's Magazine of Horror, and other exciting and anthologies sort of with a horror theme.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, we brought up She Walks in Shadows earlier, and we've had various other writers and some of the folks who worked on piecing that together. Tell us about how you got involved with that project, which of course saw a certain amount of controversy at the time, which was born out of controversy.
Yeah, it was. The anthology came to exist, to some degree because men are annoying, and like that's the short summary. They have a tendency to erase women who have contributed to science fiction and horror, which is weird because hypothetically speaking, the first, science fiction horror was written by a woman, and women were, some of the most popular practitioners of the form for a century before, men decided to jump in and take over the pulp magazines. So a lot of women have been writing Lovecraftian horror over the years, and yet while dozens of us are standing in the room, you can have people saying, why don't women write Lovecraftian horror? I don't understand why women never write this stuff. I don't understand why women don't like it. I guess they just hate squids. And
Direct quote, perhaps.
yes, literally, it was something that dumb. It was like literally nearly that dumb, which is why the original pitch, when one of my colleagues, Sylvia Moreno Garcia, first ran into that statement, it was so annoying that she was like, you know what the world needs? The world needs an all-woman Lovecraftian anthology. Uh, and then I think that if you look at the original crowdfunding campaign, the symbol was a squid. And it was basically, women love squids, and women love Lovecraftian horror, and we're going to write a bunch of it with just the female characters from Lovecraft's fiction that, are underserved. So I put, immediate dibs on the ape princess from the narrative of Arthur German. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of Lovecraft's more dubious contributions to world literature, and as a person with an anthropology degree, I found it particularly offensive. So I decided to sit down and imagine that some representation for the ape princess, like who would the ape princess be, and where would you actually have white apes coming from? And so I whipped up a little world building and a very quick story, and was very happy to be included in that anthology, which eventually won the World Fantasy Award. So not only do women write Lovecraftian fiction, but apparently they write it quite well. Award winning. And yeah, great work from the editors, and there's lots and lots of great writers in that anthology, including many stories that are more noteworthy, I think, for fans than mine. Mine is a small contribution, but there's also stories from Gemma Files there, and Molly Tanzer, etc. So you should definitely get a copy and read it.
Yes, indeed. You can't have mine. It's on my shelf right now. And
No,
it's mine.
no.
Sylvia, also a fellow Canadian. I, of course, lived in Canada for a number of years, and so happen to know a great deal of a lot of my weird fiction friends are also Canadians. David Nichol and all that crowd. Scott R. Jones, writing genre fiction in Canada. Like, do you find that there's a great deal of difference working and publishing in that milieu? I know for a lot of my friends, they sort of felt Carrie Marin wrote a whole song about how genre fiction was sort of left in the gutter by the rest of Canadian canlit. What's your experience been like?
I honestly, I haven't. I am a Canadian speculative fiction writer, but I have not been deeply involved with Canadian publishing. I have noticed that there is a dearth of funding and support from the Canada Arts Council for speculative fiction, speculative poetry, speculative fiction academia, and things like that. And I think that is definitely something that we should work on and try to change. I also find that, I think, there's been recently some controversy in the Canadian publishing scene, specifically the speculative publishing scene. The news about I very recently became eligible again because I'm now permanently Canadian. I became eligible to join SF Canada, and very soon after I joined the organization, which is the basically the professional organization for Canadian speculative fiction writers. It's analogous to the Horror Writers Association or the Science Fiction Writers of America. And yeah, we were as shocked or more so than anyone to hear the news that came out about Chizine, which had been one of the most highly regarded small presses in Canada, especially for speculative content or dark fiction. And and yeah, the whole organization was kind of reeling and really uh, not prepared at all to make any kind of statement or have any kind of response to that. And it was sort of a wake up call for a lot of us who realized that uh, as a Canadian organization, just in terms of population, Canada is much smaller than the United States. So, and we also have not been sort of actively recruiting and campaigning to have every single Canadian speculative fiction author join the organization. So we're a relatively small group. And we had no grievance committee. We had no place where people could report bad experiences as an author or as a volunteer working for someone. There's no basically apparatus to report sexual harassment or non-payment. And as a professional organization, it's kind of important for us to have some kind of apparatus in place, some kind of process where we can direct our members to resources and help them air their grievances so that stuff like this cannot go on and on for years without being addressed. Yeah, so to that end, I was nominated to the executive board of SF Canada. The elections are now over, and I am the new acting president of SF Canada. And essentially, my mandate from the people who nominated me and the responsibility that I feel is most urgent for me is to try and come up with some sort of a grievance process where we are able to receive reports and coordinate somewhat with our sister organizations like SciFi or the HWA, so that incidents like this cannot go unaddressed for years at a time.
Well, it sounds like a really heady responsibility, but I'm really glad that they're finally turning around and taking it seriously, because I mean, this is definitely something that has crossed a lot of people I know, and it's been a subject of great conversation. And I think it's important that that this stuff at least have procedures, ways of addressing, because as soon as stuff comes out, everyone came out of the woodwork to talk about their own experiences. Obviously, folks who had been feeling so much pain, but feeling like there was no one that they could talk to aside from the kind of the whispers and cons and things like that swirl around but never actually lead to any real action. So thank you for
it's a whisper network, and unfortunately whisper networks, they inevitably leave a lot of people to fall through the cracks, particularly new people. And unfortunately whisper networks, they tend to serve the people best who are least affected by harassment, who are least affected by various forms of abuse, because abusers are not stupid. They pick their targets carefully. They very often go for young people, for new people, for people who are less powerful, right? People who are publishing their first collection or their first collection in years and things like that. And yeah, it is time to start raising the bar for ethical behavior and creating systems of accountability. And there's other ethical issues in SF fandom that it's simply time for all of the professional organizations to get ahead of, right? To get in front of it. Every SF convention, every fandom convention should have a robust harassment policy in place. That should simply be mandatory at this point. I very much appreciate my professional colleagues who are, in positions of power, who are extremely popular authors or, extremely well regarded and who are likely to be guests of honor, who make a point of saying, I'm going to need to see your harassment policy before I will agree to speak at this gathering. And I need to know that you have, robust means of enforcement so that I will not be attending an event where people are, being groped or harassed or, treated unfairly or marginalized.
Well, it seems like there's finally a sense of professionalism that's being required and at least discussed, right? Like there was, I think there was a period of time when fandom was seen as this family network, and we all know how Pete gets and da da da. There's that kind of quality. And I think finally people are feeling like they have the wherewithal, the capacity, the empowerment to say, no, we can
Yeah,
be adults.
yeah. I mean, and it's subject to the same abuses that families are, right? In the sense of we all know how Uncle Pete is. Well, when all of us decide that Uncle Pete is no longer allowed to be Uncle Pete around the kids, then that behavior stops, and Uncle Pete stops being invited to gatherings because the well-being of the kids matters more. And that is the decision essentially that we are making collectively in SF fandom, which is that, you know, the uncontested indulgence of certain behavior is no longer our priority, right? Our priority is the safety and well-being of, the people who are relatively less powerful in that situation. And, yeah, it is, there are, going to be lots of exploding firecrackers in every part of the SF community. It's not just in Canada, it's going to be everywhere as this kind of accountability becomes more common, right? We're definitely, the first rumbles have already, the first shots have already been fired
Oh
in
no.
this conflict. Um, and, the sort of collective SF readership and authorship has sort of issued a resounding okay boomer to a lot of old school attitudes towards sexism and racism and uh, and homophobia and various other forms of unprofessional dubious nastiness which other industries don't tolerate anymore. They are simply off the table as being part of rational discourse. And, it doesn't do, as people who are supposedly writing the literature of the future, we're not really representing ourselves real well by being stuck in the past when it comes to this kind of thing. So, definitely hoping that many people will join SF Canada and, help us to create a new culture for SF fandom and writing and publishing. You know, the fact that there is some roll up your sleeves and maybe more difficult or harsh work to do is no reason not to get involved because there's also just lots of exciting things to do and events to be organized and grants to be given out to make our community more diverse and create opportunities for everybody. So I'm definitely hoping to see more people joining up in the months to come.
If folks do want to learn more about SF Canada or potentially join up, where should they go?
sfcanada.org. We have a website. You can learn more about what is involved in being qualified if you are a Canadian science fiction writer or a Canadian science fiction professional. Definitely check it out. Our annual dues are pretty trivial, and it's a nice community, and we are working to create more resources for our members. So definitely a great time to join.
Fantastic. And where can folks find more about your work and what's coming out in the next little while?
If you go onto Steam, you can find my entire catalog with Kerberos Productions, including all of the games that we've made, some of which are really fun, and I hope that you will enjoy them. The Sword of the Stars games, Fort Zombie, Kaiju A Go-Go, lots of exciting stuff there. You can find my published work on Amazon pretty easily. And I also have a Patreon if you want to see my works in progress or, get behind the scenes details on what I am up to and what I am working through in various games that I am creating or various fiction projects that I am working on.
Fantastic.
So that's where to find me online.
Excellent. I'm going to finally bring myself behind the stage 10 logo. I just realized I've been hiding behind the entire show. So there we go. I want to thank you so much, Arinn, for coming on this show, for talking to us about your work and your writing and the important work you're doing with SF Canada. I really hope folks at home really take a lot of that to heart because, like I said, it's important that we realize we're all in this together.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute blast. Thank you to everyone for watching. This, of course, has been Ask Lovecraft After
night.
Dark. Finally, after my face has been obscured most of the episode, I'm Lehman Kessler, the host of Ask Lovecraft After Dark, the sister program to Ask Lovecraft, the advice column where I dress up as H.P. Lovecraft and answer your questions over at AskLovecraft.com. If you want to find out more about this show and others like it, you can go to AskLovecraft.com. If you want to find out about live shows, tours, things like that, you can go to LehmanKessler.com. If you just want to see me shouting into the void, you can follow me at Twitter at Lehman Kessler. And if you enjoy this program and want to help me find my way from behind logos and whatnot, you can help keep the lights on at patreon.com/AskLovecraft. I want to thank everyone once again for watching. Arinn, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited to see what else is coming out. This has been an absolute blast.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.